I'm Niish, 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 and I'll be your companion as we slip into the liminal. Relax and sink in with an open mind, and an eye for the curious and strange. Come and go with me. All right, here we are in the Cosmic Salon again, and I just cannot tell you how excited I am about this chat. I saw one little Instagram feed of this remarkable woman and bees, and it came in, I'm not sure how or why. I was so moved by this piece that I immediately sought to get her on and have been completely thrilled ever since we have set this up. Bees to me are the sound of the realm. They are the pulse of our sacred earth. They are part of our sacred being. Bees to me have always been part of how I experience this world. There is something primordial within the process of tuning into a bee. We already know how important they are in our ecosystem, but there's a greater world of metaphysics around bees. And this was part of why I honed in on what Farrah King was talking about. It just hit me in the heart. And then I went through some of the Instagram stuff and found myself in tears over a video on the mourning process they do, and we'll talk about that. And this is everything I aspire to be, with trying to get in tune with being a steward to bees myself here. I've wanted to do it for so long. I have loved bees since I was little. I've always been that person that never ran, and they seem to be around me. They follow me. I love them. And I've always been curious about people's responses to them, as if they're going to sting them and be scary, and felt that if you bring that energy, you will get that energy. And so it is just with a massive amount of heartfelt honor that I welcome you, Farrah King of Hive Song Apiary, to the Cosmic Salon. Welcome in.
Oh, thank you, Niish. I have my hand on my heart right now, because that was so beautiful and so heartfelt. And I am so honored and delighted to be on your show to talk about the bees, which are the loves of my life.
Yeah, and that really comes through you. As I was saying here, I mean, it's palpable, and the way you approach them is in such a sacred way. Now, I love some of the other people out there, is Anarchy, Apiary, and others that have inspired me. No one has touched me in the way you have with this experience. It is different. You're unique. And it's interesting that the year I decided to start beekeeping, here you are. So let's get into this and tell us about you, and how did you come to find your relationship with bees at whatever age, and what brings you into the state you are now, with such advocacy for them, such reverence, this beauty of presenting them to people in the world as more than just honey makers.
Yeah, this is so deep and rich. Well, my journey began with the bees about 11 years ago. I was in a place of rebirth in my life where I had just went through a divorce, and I had lost my mother, and I was renting a home that allowed me to have a bigger space to have a garden. And somehow I stumbled upon a weekend workshop that around beekeeping, and I decided that I wanted to explore that and maybe bring in bees to help with my gardening and maybe bring in more yield. And so that's really where my journey began. And I initially learned how to tend to bees from a commercial, conventional model of beekeeping, where you get these nucleuses of bees or nukes of bees, and then you feed them with a bunch of sugar water, and you treat them with chemicals because they have a varroa mite challenge. And so I was doing all of these things that I was taught, and I kept failing. And every end of the season, I would come to this place of like my bees would abscond or they would die. And it would just be just a bunch of grief around what am I doing wrong here? And I actually went through that cycle for several years until one season my colony was collapsing, and they were being overtaken by wasps and robber bees because they were a weak colony. And there was a few bees that flew onto my front door. And I just remembered a moment where I was like looking at these frantic, stressed out, and bees, because their home was being robbed out and taken. And it was like this connection that I needed to listen differently. I needed to do things differently. And I really sat with that over, it was just so profound. I'm just looking at these bees and they're just on my front door, and it seems really small, but it was huge for me. And so that winter, I really sat with it. And then I was like, there's got to be another way to approach beekeeping. And so similarly to the way that I have shown up in your life as an inspiration around the bees, I also discovered a mentor that was talking about natural beekeeping practices. And I just had this somatic feeling like, yes, I need to learn from this woman. And so she provided a 10-month women's beekeeping apprenticeship program. And so who is Ariella Daly. And I have to like give her so much gratitude, because she is an amazing, amazing lover of the bees as well. But I did her 10-month apprenticeship program. And that year I just read as many books that I could read about natural beekeeping. And I just really began to shift my perspective about, instead of and I have a recent reel right now that's kind of going viral, but I really did come to this place of like, instead of what can the honeybee do for me, what can I do for the honeybee? And so from that sort of reframing, I just revolutionized how I decided to beekeep. And so I scrapped all the plastic out of the hives. I decided I was not going to treat the bees with chemicals. I was not going to feed them sugar water. I tried different hive styles, and I really also started working with the land that I was going to be bringing them in. And so some of it was just a lot of prayers, a lot of devotion to creating altars and devotions to my land, and just a lot of deep listening. And so in 2022, when I brought in this particular queen and her colony, and I call her my queen of all queens because she's still in my apiary right now. And she's the reason I am really here talking to you today. But that year, I found a gentleman who collected that swarm, and I brought them to my apiary. At the time, it was just a one hive. And all I wanted was to just successfully winter one colony. And that was just a small goal that I had, but I just wanted one colony to winter. and to make it one full year. And then I would feel accomplished, like I was able to be a successful steward to bees. And then she swarmed, and it was so magical because it was on World Bee Day. I just remember just being so elated. It's the highest expression when a colony of bees swarms, because they're in their most ripe, vital existence. And it's just the most beautiful, magical moment if you've ever got to witness a swarm of bees. But she decided to stay, and so I collected that swarm, and there I had 2. And then later that summer, I had several swarms that just showed up in my yard, in my what I call my upper orchard. We have a few apple trees and a cherry tree, and I collected them. And that year I went from 1 colony of bees to 6. And then, which was never, ever my intentions, but here I am. And then after that year, after I wintered those 6 colonies, the next year I wintered 12. So I'm just coming out of wintering 12 colonies successfully this year. And so I'm right now on the precipice of swarm season here in my region, and I'm preparing, and it's so exciting. And swarm season's the best. It's the best.
This is incredible. The synchronicities, the World Bees Day, the synchronicities here are always something I look at. And one of the things, so we're going to start looking at some of this. I had a bee colony come, and it was in my porch. It had gotten into a column, and I was perfectly fine with it, by the way. I was like, if that's where they want to be. I let the woods come up around me. So I'm in a small town, but I also practice permaculture, food foresty stuff, but I let nature really run the show. And so it's just this wild wood of beautiful nature around me. So they just, things like being here. And I noticed, and I was heartbroken one day, I came out onto the porch and I saw a yellow jacket come out of there. I don't know. I was distraught. I didn't know what to do. That was just a whole sad story. But of course, the bees didn't survive. I don't even know what would have become if I should have let bees in my porch. But I'm like that kind of a person where it was like, my casa, su casa. Bees, you can live here. And so I don't know anything about that, but I do know that the wasps came in, and I had no knowledge that they did what they do with bees. So let's stop here for a minute and talk about wasps and how that all works.
Yeah. So wasps, I don't generally have a problem with them throughout the spring and summer, but typically what happens is in the fall, when there's something that is called a dearth. It's when the nectar flow ceases, and it's sort of a critical moment in nature when all of the insects know that the resources are stopping. And so if there is a weak colony of bees and wasps sense it, they will go after a colony of bees, and sadly they can take down a colony in no time, a matter of hours. And what they typically do is they go after the larva of the young. So it immediately debilitates a colony because they take their baby, the brood, or the future bees. And then I've seen wasps be so destructive that they'll go through the honey stores and even eat through wax. So having a healthy, strong colony helps for me and my apiary to help uh, mitigate wasps, I put out right now, even I have them now, early in the spring, I put out wasp decoys around my yard. I don't use any chemicals or sprays or anything like that in my entire property. I mean, wasps have their place in our ecosystem. They do help with pest management within gardens, but they can be absolutely destructive to a colony of bees if they're weak. But I'll also put up hive. I'll do hive entrance reducers. I reduce the entrance basically of my hives to help them be able to protect themselves from a potential wasp attack. And I will say this, I have a couple colonies right now that are heavy propolizers, if you will. They've actually propolized majority of their entrance. So I don't even have to give them reducers. They have already done that themselves. So that's also just a sign of how intelligent these these beings are. Like, they don't really need us, but my young, smaller colonies, I'll give them entrance reducers. But the more older colonies, they can protect themselves. It's pretty remarkable.
They never cease to amaze me. Okay, that's good to know. I know everything has a place in the ecosystem, and I am one person that allows them, to be here as well. But I just was heartbroken because of this innate love I have for bees, honeybees, and then also bumblebees, which I can't tell you how much I love bumblebees. It was an awakening for me, Farrah, of, oh man, they do have predators like this. I really was ignorant to it. So when we're looking at, no chemicals here either. I can't have any of that. When we're looking at the ideas of going into kind of a cohabitation with bees, having them with you, there's a lot of material out there, and so much is geared towards ways that seem really, I don't know, I'm just not attracted to, and it's the plastic stuff. So I think I did encounter that video where you're letting they make the towers and stuff. Let's talk about natural beekeeping and what are the essentials. What does one need to know about that? We're going to get metaphysical, but I want to get some of the structural stuff in the mix here.
Sure. So beekeeping, first of all, I feel like it's very relational. And it's also a choose your own adventure. I'll share with you my perspective and my ways of what I consider natural beekeeping, but there are other opinions, I guess, and ways. But for me, I have no plastic at all in any of my hives. I currently work with two different styles of hives. One is called a top bar hive. The other is the typical boxes that you see that are called the Langstroth. And so I give the bees frames within the Langstroth, which is the boxed style hive. But I will melt beeswax on the top, like a beeswax candle on the top of the frame that will encourage them to draw down naturally. And then with the top bar, it's kind of like a triangle. And so bees also, I will put a little bit of beeswax on that, and then they will draw down naturally. And so when the bees are allowed to draw down naturally, they'll make the comb, and they'll make the set. What I think is really also a sign of incredible intelligence and brilliance is that they'll choose the cell sizes that they need to accommodate brood and or honey within the hive. And so varroa mite is a big topic in the beekeeping world. And I was initially, taught that you have to treat them, and the varroa mite is, going to kill your bees. And you have to be, if you're a good steward, you have to treat them with these chemicals. And it's just like you have to do it. But what I've read about, and I have lived it, and I observe it in my own apiary, is that when you give the bees the freedom, the sovereignty to make their own comb, they will make smaller cell sizes, which eliminates the lifespan cycle of a varroa mite, because the varroa mite eats on the fat larva of a developing baby bee. And so they can mitigate their own varroa mite issue if you give them the freedom to do so. And so that's one aspect of natural beekeeping. Another is that I don't do sugar water to my bees whatsoever. So sugar water it's an idea of stimulating the colony. So it kind of stems from having your bees be in a honey production mode for you. Like, some people want their bees because they want them to make honey. And so they have to stimulate them all the time. So they're constantly making, but nature doesn't work that way. Nature is sort of rhythmic and with its nectar flows. And so sugar water just constantly stimulates the queen to constantly forage your bees. And so if you have more bees, then they're constantly having to, eat more and make more. And it's just an overworking of the queen. And it's again, it's not really natural. It's not a natural way. And then the last thing I'll say, which I feel like is the most important part of natural beekeeping, is allowing the bees to swarm every year. I don't suppress their natural inclination to want to swarm. I don't split or divide my colonies up, kill queens, introduce new queens. I allow them to swarm because it is their highest expression as far as I'm concerned.
What happens in this process when you're allowing this to go on?
I always hope that they'll cluster nearby so that I can potentially collect them. That's always the prayer. And I do encourage them to want to stay by, I do something called tanging the bees. So I have a singing bowl, and I tang it, and it creates like a vibration, and it tends to get the bees to kind of slow down their swarming. Or if they just go off, they go off. I mean, if they have this, I just really respect their sovereignty.
Yes.
So I have lost swarms to nature. And then if I have come home from work last year, and I'll just come home, and I'll be several different clusters hanging on trees, just waiting for me to collect them at 6:00 at night. And so, so if they swarm when I'm at work, and then I come home and they're just hanging out waiting, and it's getting cold, I'll just go and collect them. And so, and I'm actually really blessed. I have a few women local beekeepers that also come and adopt them too when I call on them.
I've always wanted to do it, but I never was inspired by any of the plastics, or I just always felt like there was a natural way, like they are expressions of our natural, the world that we know that was natural, is because we're moving into another world. Not me, but the world is digitalizing itself and changing the frequency, and we'll get into that. But I always wanted to have a natural experience and not bring in, I knew sugar water just didn't seem right. I don't do that with my hummingbirds. I'm very happy hummingbirds around here. I just feel like that is a disservice to the natural process. And so I knew I had this idea, and I had seen people beekeep without any protective gear. They'll smoke, but other than that, this like really naturalistic one-on-one with a hive communication. I've seen it, and I knew when I saw that, which was on the East Coast, I wanted to go that direction. And then trying to find information when I was first wanting to do this, it was really difficult. Everything was the old, the standard kind of poisonous ways, I consider it. And so, in the last decade, there's been a lot of wonderful stuff floating out there with natural beekeeping. I still feel overwhelmed by the process. So I have this reverence for the process, but I also have like this anxiety about doing it. So I did get one of those top beehives. So I have one of those to start, and I had it last year too. And I don't know, I keep finding myself feeling, I guess, reserved because I don't want to have the sorrows of failing a hive.
Yeah. I will say being a bee tender does invite you to the full spectrum of life, death, and rebirth. And, it's honeybees are incredible teachers and you will lose a colony here and there. It's just part of the journey. And I'm actually really grateful for that teaching that they have provided for me. And yeah, it's never comfortable to feel grief and to have loss and to feel like you failed. And every year I struggle with all of those questions and how can I be a better steward and a better listener? And it's so worth the journey. Sitting next to a humming, thriving colony of bees, even if it is just for a season, their hum, their frequency that they bring to your land is, and this is why I've dubbed my apiary the Hive song, the Hive song apiary, is because they have this song and it's just so euphoric and magical and just the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And it makes me feel so good no matter what kind of day I've had. It's just truly the most beautiful frequency on earth as far as I'm concerned.
This is why, like my early relationship as a child, I would hear them out in the wood and I would go towards them. And I've been at different retreats, magical kinds of retreats, and there would be a swarming hive or something. And it's funny because, very kind of nature-oriented people, and they would all just be upset. And there I am lying in the field and the bees are all around because there's something I don't, and this, you don't have to explain this to somebody that knows, but I don't know. There's something, it takes me to a higher level, and it's literally a vibration, as we know. But to fear it is, I don't know. I've never had a fear of honeybees. And so that hive song, I loved seeing that's what you call your apiary because I understand that. And I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier in the intro area is I was sitting there sobbing when I was watching that incredibly moving clip you did with the morning song. And it's just so, I'm going to put that in the show notes for sure. Death is part of the greater cycle. And this is in my service to the great goddess, the great feminine principle. I've always came in more in the crone side of it, which is accepting of these darknesses and understanding the power that moves within the blackened spaces and how we are one with that and that becomes the light. And so